Welcome to Pep Talks with Eric, where we shift gears from negative feedback loops and drive towards the life we truly want. I'm your host, Eric Ayers. I believe in the power of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Together, we'll explore how connections fuel our growth and create amazing experiences. In this podcast, we'll tune out the noise of the world and tune into what we really want and what really matters. Guys, thank you so much for joining us in another episode of Pep Talks with Coach Eric. I'm Eric, and I'm joined today by an amazing, loving human being, and I'm so excited that she is here. To tell you a little bit about Miss Kerri, having faced trauma and addiction, she understands deep suffering, and her journey of transformation has led to apply insights from psychology, theology, and mindfulness, beautiful, to heal and embrace unconditional love. So with 24 years as a leader and CEO in corporate America, she's created safe spaces for individuals to rediscover their true selves beyond the societal expectations, which is huge. And as a passionate speaker and coach, she empowers others and organizations to break free from limiting beliefs and embrace their intrinsic power, fostering a more liberated and fulfilling life. So hopefully in the bio, you can see why I've invited Kerri to come on to help share some wisdom with the collective. So Kerri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh my God, I love you, Eric. And thank you for having me. It's going to be a party. And it's so funny. I hate bios. You're the second person who asked me for a bio. And I'm like, how do you encapsulate unconditional love? Right? Because everything's really a story. But I do think it's important that people have context as to why I know I'm a thought leader and I show up as love and create spaces. And at the same time, how does two paragraphs ever encapsulate the gift that you and I both, because I know your story, offer the world, right?
Mm-hmm. No, and I love that we're diving right into this from the get-go, because yes, it's the differentiation of our analytical aspect of understanding someone and understanding someone, right? And it's almost like the resume that is given to invite us into a conversation. So but this bio is spot on, because you've hit all of the pieces that ignite thoughts in my mind, like combining psychology, theology, and mindfulness. I mean, that's a trio worth diving into. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it even goes to quantum physics and neuroscience. I've been studying myself and how to hack my own brain since I was 14, and more because, kind of speaking to your logical mind, my parents come from academia, and one of my parents could spit facts about mental health and addiction. Like, she is a world class expert, but to be able to apply it and to know rather than to be educated in is fundamentally different. And that's why my study in psychology starting at 14 led me into all areas, because psychology gave me insight as to some of the behaviors I was continuing to find myself stuck in. But it wasn't until I studied neuroscience and energy and how our emotional state really dictates what we attract into our human experience that I was able to give myself that permission to break free from those habits. And so really, I call myself a scientist of self. And I think every single one of us owes it to ourselves to be that scientist of ourselves, because there's 8 billion plus people. And what is going to work for me to step into my intrinsic power and fundamental understanding of who I am and what feels yummy and juicy and delightful for me may not work for Eric, right? But
Mm-hmm.
Eric is responsible figuring that out. And sure, you and I both being coaches have this beautiful gift of being able to guide and bear witness and hold space while people step into what can feel like a very scary and difficult journey. But ultimately, it is our own curiosity that's going to lead us to discovering ourselves.
Curiosity. Oh, this idea of curiosity intrigues me so much because anytime I allow little Eric, the 5-year-old Eric within me, to come out and explore, like magic happens. Because he is the most curious individual I know. And that curiosity leads to imagination, which I love because as we tap into this toddler approach of life that I refer to, you brought up something that is so profound, at least in my story, and a lot of people, a lot of clients I've worked with, their story is you said responsibility of becoming my own self scientist, which I love that terminology because ultimately it's a study of self. But creating responsibility tells me that, wait a minute, this is not a happenstance. Like, I'm not a product of just what's coming in, but I have control over what happens in my life. And I would love for you to share a little bit more about your journey of what got you to here, as well as understanding that responsibility and taking control of your thoughts, your mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything's cyclic, right? And I think when you look at society as a whole, and at least in my experience, for many, many years, I felt very much victimized by my set of circumstances, right? I dove headfirst into drug and sex addiction at 14, really chasing this idea of love that seemed to elude me within my family setting through no fault of my parents. They did the very best they could. And the reality is when you live and exist in an experience of drugs and sex, you inevitably open yourself up for more traumatic experiences. And as such, I did. I experienced 2 rapes. I was in a very volatile relationship for 5 years where there was a lot of physical and verbal abuse. And so, I just kept finding myself in these situations where I kept being wounded and I kept being traumatized and I kept blaming everybody, but failing to realize that the choices that I was making, i.e., consuming drugs, i.e., seeking love outside myself, things of that nature, were opening me up to experience these, sufferings, right? Because it's a lot of suffering. Fortunately, again, as I shared with your audience and you before, I've been studying psychology at 14 and going through the breakup that I did on in part because of my twin sister. My twin sister looked at me and said, "Kerri, if you stay in this relationship, you're going to die." At that time, I hated myself. I didn't care if I lived or died. It had no bearing whatsoever on my choices. However, my twin sister and I have been through the wars together since we were born, and I could not fundamentally grasp leaving her to face the world alone because at that time my idea was this world was a hard place to live in and it was filled with suffering. So her telling me that really forced me to make some changes, and so I ended up getting sober from drugs and I left that relationship. It culminated in a year court case. And I really fundamentally did a lot of work on breaking some of the behaviors in which I found myself. But to your point, belief system, I never worked on the fundamental subconscious beliefs that I had created within my own psyche based on my experiences that that would have kept me sober. And so I found myself addicted to success. I believed that I was worthy of love if I achieved success. I didn't finish high school. My parents told me if you don't go to college, you're not going to be successful. And so I found myself working 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., climbing the corporate ladder for that perceived worthiness, that perceived being enough and having enough and all of that. And as I continued to work up the corporate ladder, I was miserable. I entered into a marriage that didn't serve me. I had two children I never saw, and so I found myself back numbing out with alcohol. But fortunately for me, throughout that time, to your point, little Eric, right? I had a little Kerri who I
Yeah.
still do, and she comes out every day now. That's super curious. So
Yeah.
I kept diving into all of this information on how it is I could start to feel good, this elusive joy that everybody's talking about. That I'm like, man, I'm doing the things and I don't feel any joy. But it wasn't until my oldest sister passed away due to drinking that I really understood that if I didn't make changes, not just consume information, but do the hard, scary things that I knew I needed to do but didn't want to do,
Yeah.
I was likely to face a similar outcome in my own life. And I looked at my two daughters and I owed them more. And so that's where I took from 14 to 22 years at least, if not more, of studies I finally applied to my own life and started to not just spit the information I knew, but I practiced it. I
Right.
did the hard, scary things.
And that is so crucial because there's a difference in knowing, in having a knowing of, oh, that's how you ride a bike, as opposed to knowing how to ride a bike. And the only way you can get there is through experience, through doing. And it's painful, it sucks, you're going to fall. And then one day you're not. And you're going to be like, I'm riding the bike. And that I think is the crux and the beauty of everything that we go through is I'm a very analytical person, so I can relate so much to what you just said. I really need to know the how, but I confuse that. I'm getting way better. I confuse it in the time and knowing and asking myself, well, how from an analytical standpoint, instead of give it to me and let me figure this out and
Yeah.
understand it how, truly how. And that comes, from being vulnerable and allowing, as Rumi says, allowing the light to enter our scars, right? Um, I want to highlight something I think is super important is you mentioned during your journey was seeking conditional love or being used to conditional love. And it was all external. If I heard you correctly, it was seeking love outside of self, which created a conditional environment setting for that love. What was the moment or transition into tapping into self love, unconditional love, peace, joy, the higher
You know,
energy?
that's an interesting question because I do believe that my whole experience has led me to, I mean, I love myself more than anybody else and I love people. But I mean, I am truly fundamentally my favorite person in the world. I have the best time with myself. But, I, for me, and I'm not here to sell anybody on anything, right? Whether
Yeah.
you are somebody who believes in a higher power, God, love, whatever, or you understand science and that quantum physics fundamentally proves the existence of an unseen energy, however you define it. I sat in my sister's blood. She threw up all her blood, and I had an out of body experience with God. And I knew I was perfection in that moment. And I also knew that I had a responsibility to break the generational trauma that has pervaded my family for decades and decades. And so it was just this overwhelming sense of completeness. And it's not something, I think people hear that and they're like, oh, wow, you have it all figured out. No, no, no. Like that dark night of the soul, real thing. But it gave me an understanding that nothing I did was wrong. And I think when you have that lens, you are a little bit more courageous, that you're a little
Ooh.
bit more capable of doing the thing that most people, particularly the ones that love you and are the closest to you, are not going to understand. Because to fundamentally love and know yourself means that it's not going to make sense to anybody. And for me, anyway, and a lot of my clients, their closest loved ones actively resist the
Mhm.
choices and the change because they're operating out of fear rather than unconditional love, not through their own fault. They don't know any better. And so I just had that ability to just be like, mm. And then also testifying in a rape case, for myself and being by myself. I knew then, I was like, I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. So I might
Mhm.
as well do and go all out. And whatever the consequences, at least I can look at myself in the mirror and be like, you did what felt right for you, and
Right.
that was enough.
That's a brilliant way to describe this. Something that stood out profoundly in that, I mean, many different aspects. One thing that stood out profoundly was the fact of nothing I do is wrong,
Yeah.
meaning it gives forgiveness of self a whole new meaning, a whole new definition, because now it's the human experience, right? It's learning who you are through action instead of, damn, I did this wrong again, and I have to forgive myself. And it's like, no, that I think is, I mean, that's a mic drop, and we can walk away right now, because like, how beautiful is that, and how self-loving is that to say, no, I'm here to experience. I'm not attempting to harm anyone. My
Yeah.
intentions are pure, and I'm seeking to be the best version of myself, which creates that Ubuntu idea of I am because we are, and we're going to expand humanity because I'm expanding who I am. And oh,
It
beautiful.
goes to curiosity. Think about it. I mean, the 2 year
Correct.
old self who makes a mud pie that falls apart in their hand isn't
Yeah.
beating themselves up because it didn't stick together. And that's
Yes.
why I, like you, fundamentally, approach life with just curiosity and saying yes. If it's not like, if you don't tell me, Kerri, go out and actively seek to harm another,
Mhm.
but try something new, every single time it's yes please, because the worst that's going to happen is it's going to be something that I can laugh at myself for, and I fundamentally believe this work requires excessive laughter. And secondly, I have no idea what the next thing that brings me incredible joy is until I come from curiosity and try new things.
Yeah. Yes. I 100% agree with that. Spot on. I want to, for just a second, for just a moment, kind of tap into another idea that you brought in is when people are actively working on themselves, they sometimes have a significant other or someone really close to them that is, they're not attempting to antagonize this or negate this, but they are for many different reasons. I honestly believe that, and this is from personal experience, when someone close to me is changing, they're challenging me to change as well. And I don't want to, because it's like, nope, I know this is going to be uncomfortable and I'm going to have to put work in. I don't want to. So I'm good if you change, but don't bring me into it. But then that can't happen. So I'm curious of your take on how does one cope with that? How do they manage with that opposing force of wanting to be the greatest they can be and having someone that is supposed to love them unconditionally opposing them at this?
Yeah, that's challenging. I mean, because at the end of the day, we're energy and we're energetic
Yeah.
expressions. And what do I mean by that? Is most people operate from an energy frequency that's close to death. Right. And they've
Yeah.
proven this: shame, guilt, fear,
Yep.
apathy, anger, all of these emotions are really low vibration. And what
Hmm.
happens is we start to grow, our energy starts to shift. So that's beautiful in that we're magnets too. If we're energy, we're also magnets. So what do? We attract like energy. So we end up attracting people who can support, nurture, and love us through that growth. However, there are times, and it is fundamental, right? A negative and a positive energy cannot coexist at the same time. You can
Mhm.
neutralize it. So, if somebody is experiencing change and growth, and somebody they love is not changing and growing, it's most likely, if that person's not growing, you're going to outgrow them, because otherwise your growth is eventually going to be neutralized, and then you're going to start to contract. Because if we're not expanding, guys, we are contracting. There's
Mhm.
no way you're staying the same, right? Think about mental health. I see it all the time. Somebody who struggles with some anxiety in their teens, now they have a little bit more pervasive anxiety in their 20s. By the time they're in their 30s, they're either actively numbing out with medications or some type of form of addiction, whether it's drugs, sex, gambling, you name it, work, like me,
Mhm.
because it's getting worse and worse and worse. So it really is being okay with it, receiving that love, nurturing, and support from places that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of. And what I mean by that is, for so many years, I felt victimized by not having the traditional mom, that mother, that nurturing mother figure who was like, right on, Kerri, you keep going. Da, da, da. And I realized that because I was holding so tightly to the individual who gave birth to me, I was closing myself off from all of these beautiful women who were older, who were nurturing, who were rallying around me. And as soon as I let go of the idea that that role had to be given to me by a specific individual, so many other people wrapped me in their warm, comforting embrace and bore witness to me as I continued to grow. And so it's really letting go of the idea of how you think or who you think is the person that can show up for you, and allowing yourself to be open to what the universe is providing you, because as you grow, inevitably you're attracting support. There will be more and more and more people who are going to be like, keep going, you're doing amazing, I got you, how can I support you?
Mhm. That to me is, I think, a shared difficulty on many people's journey of putting all their value into one person, or saying, I need to get all of my validation from this one thing, this one person, whether that is the success of your career. Like I need this validation. And by letting go, which I'm going to pause for a second, the two things you brought up there, the energy that we are and the letting go, two books by the same author, Dr. David Hawkins, Power versus Force and Letting Go, two profoundly impacting books that have revolutionized the way I see the world and interact in it. I highly recommend people check it out, because it takes this into a deep understanding. And so from that, one really curious and interesting thing that is coming to mind from that book is, below anger, there is no energy that can be created into anything. So ultimately, from an energy level, and we are energy beings, we share energy, we attract energy. Like I love the way you provided that explanation. Anything below anger is ultimately a waste of energy in terms of perpetuating us and moving us forward. But anger has a super cool piece to it, because it has just enough energy to transmute into something freaking amazing, which is elevating our energy level, right?
Which is courage.
Absolutely. So it's that fine line of, all right, we're scared, we have this fear, we're pissed off. What are we going to do with it? And it's like, it's a fuel, and we can create or we can destroy with it. And ultimately, like, it comes to that pivotal point of, we're so mad. I found myself super mad at the decisions that I made up to that point. But it's interesting, because it's like, at that point, you choose, I'm going to see the world this way instead of the way I've been looking at it before. And this way is all about, How may I serve? What is best for me? How do I fit into this world? And it starts by, how do I fit into my world and my thoughts? And so, which leads me into something that you speak a lot about, is authenticity. And I would love for you to riff on authenticity for a bit.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting because it's a word that everybody uses, and I fundamentally bear witness to it being, from my perspective, misunderstood. So authenticity for me is allowing the spontaneity of the present moment to manifest in the physical. And what do I mean by that? It means that if I want to sing to you, Eric, I'm gonna sing to you and not worry. Dancing, right? Being at work and making something light and fun, or really we limit ourselves when we filter ourselves. And so authenticity is just allowing that intuition, that spark, that like insight, that whatever comes to you that feels so good in that moment to happen. And yet so often we're like, oh my God, I'm on Eric's podcast. I'm considered a coach. I need to show up as a professional so that people take me seriously. And in doing so, we actually lower our energetic expression, because what they have found, guys, is that we are most powerful as our own unique individual self. Because think about it, our individuality, our true authenticity, whatever that looks like, is self love. Self love operates at a megahertz of 550. If that is even greater than that, you are just a full expression of unique love, and it's a gift to the world. And so, sure, being authentic to yourself can be very off putting for people, particularly in lower energies, people who sit in fear, guilt, shame. Trust me, I can be difficult for them to swallow at times. They're like, oh my God, this girl is fake. She's so cheesy, or whatever story it is. However, I also attract the people who are like, oh my God, how do I get to
Yeah.
that place? And it's just by my favorite word in the world outside of curiosity and imagination, permission. The
Yeah.
only person who can give you permission to sing on a podcast or dance or do whatever is yourself. And so, how do you get to a place where you give yourself permission to do the thing that feels right for you in this moment?
Boom. Yes. And where did we create all of these constructs? Right?
Yep.
Through these societal constructs that are not real. They're
None.
made up. They're
Yep.
just we've taken them on as truths, and we've lived with them as truth for so long that it's like farther and farther away from our true authentic self, which is that 3, 4, 5 year old who, whatever that kid wanted to do, that kid did. And it was the mud pie, right? If it fell apart, cool. I need more water. I need less water. And it was trial, error, trial, error. And we just keep doing this. And
Or you throw the mud pie. That's the other thing,
bam.
authenticity to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Like people, why do I hate a bio? Right? Honestly, because I'm fundamentally changing and growing, expanding all the time. What feels right for me in this moment may not feel right for me in the next. It's why I love stoicism, right? And a lot of people
Yeah.
will be like, well, some stoics contradict themselves. I sure hope they do, because they were curious and they were able to say, oh, I stand on this principle now, but wait a minute, I've examined it and now I feel differently. And it's not that they are wafting, it's that they fundamentally understand that their perspective based on the experience that they've currently been in is going to
Yes.
change our ideas. And that's why we've got to give each other grace, and we've got to like give ourselves permission to change our minds
Hmm.
all the time.
Hmm.
Because maybe I want to make a mud pie and then maybe I want to smear it all over my face, or maybe I want to paint my dad's car with it. I don't
Right.
know.
Right. Right. We'll find out. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And giving ourselves permission to simply be and interact with that is amazing. I remember hearing Wayne Dyer say it this way. You know, he began writing in the I think the early 70s, maybe the late 60s. And one of his last talks, he said, you know, I've written books over the decades, and each book is different. And when he said, when I look or reread Erroneous Zones, he was like, it was about how to live as an emotional being. But then towards the end, it was about spirit energy, about who I am. And he was like, is that wrong what I said back then? No, that's what I believed and are right from my heart. But to your point from the Stoics aspect is, if we are not continuing to shift our ideas, then we're doing ourselves a disservice by not asking questions anymore. And I think that is a huge pivotal point in our life, is identifying, are we asking questions? Because if curiosity isn't filling our minds, something's off. Because that is who we are. We're here to ask questions. We're here to learn. Like, it's a human experience. Like that.
Yep.
That's what it is. And my main gift in this world is to create sparks of transformation, to cause one to say, "Wait, what the hell did he just say? Like, what?" And that is like, let's snap out of this and let's think of something else, because that's what shocked my journey into traversing down my avenue instead of everyone else's.
Yeah, I love that. Well, that's the thing is, if we're not curious, we're in a box, guys. We fit ourselves in this box, and based on how many beliefs you hold so tightly to, your box keeps you closed off, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Like, I look at some older people. There are many people who just have themselves and maybe their life partner to connect with, and now
Yeah.
they're living life vicariously through others, but stuck in this I mean, truly, it's an enslavement. It's a self-confined imprisonment. And that's the work that you and I, and it's why I fundamentally respect you, and I'm always happy to have you on my show, because we understand that. I mean, that Eric who shows up on no particular reason in a couple weeks could be have a different perspective than
Right.
right now. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
That's a gift we give to the world.
Yeah. Yes, because the true education is unlearning and relearning. And how can we do that if we are not challenging our own beliefs and researching? And that's what we have the opportunity to do all the time. And
Yeah.
if we challenge those beliefs with trying it, it's like, okay, this is bringing all of our senses into it. Now we're actually having a human experience instead of only, which what we talked about earlier, only relating to reading and listening and consuming. But
Yeah.
that consumption has to be thrown into application. And ultimately, like, it's fun. It is a lot of fun to apply something that you've learned, but it's also difficult. So, or it can be difficult.
Yeah, I'll give your listeners a really good example. 2 days ago, I love watching inspiring documentaries. If I'm gonna watch TV, it's something that's gonna inspire me and get me fired up. That's about it. But
Yeah.
I happened to stumble on this documentary. I had no clue about it, and it was the federation, the soccer federation in Spain, and the fallout that had happened with the president of this federation after he kissed a woman on her mouth, and it was all this stuff, right? But as I watched this documentary unfold, I was becoming really emotionally charged, super emotionally charged. And I'm watching this poor woman be eviscerated by this gentleman and all of this. Ultimately, he stepped down and, quote unquote, she's vindicated, which whatever. But what I realized, and this is the work, this is the uncomfortable work that I want people to understand, is
Mhm.
in that moment, I had the opportunity to examine, wow, as a 19-20-year-old who testified in her own trial, right? Who was eviscerated by the defense, who went through all of this. I was in survival mode at that time, which is okay. That's how I got to here, right? I was surviving. But when you're in surviving, You're not feeling your feelings. You're disassociated. And so that documentary was the gift the universe provided me to say, oh, Kerri, you got some trapped energy that you never processed. So I looked at, fortunately, my partner knows me very well, and I just fell apart. And I'm like, holy crap. But in that falling apart, it took me minutes because I allow myself to feel whatever comes up, whatever experiences either triggering me to have an emotional response or whatever. I don't have any excess baggage, meaning I'm not crying over all this made up stories and stuff. I'm like, oh, something has to come up. I'm releasing it. And now I'm moving on. So it took all of 5 minutes. That is the work. It's forever being curious. And instead of making it good, bad, right, wrong, it needs to make sense. You allow yourself to just be in that experience. And when you do that, you just move through whatever's coming up and you come right back. And even then, it's joy because I know that I'm freeing myself. I'm freeing myself from something that I didn't even know was there that needed to be let go.
Guys, if you are enjoying this conversation, I'm going to ask that you tune into part 2 because we are going to dive deep into exactly what Kerri just went over, which is so profound, so impactful for moving forward beyond our current situation. Thank you for joining me on Pep Talks with Eric, where together we shift our focus, embrace connection, and drive towards a more fulfilling life. Remember, it's not just about where you're headed, but how you choose to travel along the way. As you continue your journey, know that you have the power to change lanes and focus on the path that leads to positivity, purpose, and connection. Let's stay connected and continue empowering your journey one commute at a time. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. And until then, be well, be loved.